Hi everyone. I thought I'd take a moment to show you how I painted the crew figures for the Sherman Firefly. I don't usually show much of my figure work in the YouTube videos, so this is a chance to give you guys a closer look at how I approach it. I've got a technique that isn't that common in figure painting, and I thought some of you might find it interesting. So I'll walk you through what I do and explain a bit about how and why I paint them this way. So let's jump straight in. I've already got the figures primed in black, which gives a good foundation for the shadow, and from there I move straight on to pre-shading with white paint. What I do here is spray from an angle above the head. That way paint only collects on the surfaces that light would fall on, and prevents the paint from hitting the underside of the recesses, which is naturally where your shadows will form. It creates an exaggerated shadow effect, which really helps when it comes to applying the colours later on. So you'll notice here that I move the airbrush forward whilst gently misting with the white paint. This helps you get paint onto the lower parts of the body. Moving the tip of the airbrush to just past the shoulder line will help you target the waist, and moving the tip of the airbrush to just past the waist will help you target the legs. Don't forget to angle the figure as well so you can target the sides. I like to treat it in two halves, working on the legs first and then moving up and working on the shoulders. All the time now I'm just turning the figure around and trying to spot areas where I think it needs a little more paint. So I'm just going to check the model now and take a look from a different angle. And I'm thinking that's just about there. So if we take a look from below, you can actually see it just looks black, which is the complete opposite if you look at it from above. And this blend of the black and the white is what's going to create all our shadow. Next up, I start laying down the base colours. I like to do this using what I describe as more of a glaze. The paint's thinned right down, probably more than 10:1 thinner to paint, so it stays really transparent and lets the black and white pre-shading show through. I just lightly spray the figure all over. This time, instead of only spraying from above, I actually reverse it, working more from the ground up. I'm mainly targeting the darker areas because they'll need a bit more paint to blend smoothly into the highlights. The key thing here is not to overdo it. If the paint gets too heavy, it will start pooling in the recesses, and that's definitely not what you want. You'll usually see when the figure's getting close to saturation, the surface starts to look a bit glossy, or the air starts to push the paint around the figure. When that happens, just stop and let it dry. You can then assess the model once it's dry and start painting again. This figure's just about done, so I can let it dry and move on to the next stage, adding some highlights and getting a bit more definition into that figure. For the highlights, I start by mixing up a lighter tone using British uniform lights, a bit of green-brown and some decomposed flesh. That gives me a nice warm tone that works well for the sun-faded fabric. I airbrush again from a top-down angle, just catching the raised areas, the shoulders, the tops of arms, anywhere the light would hit naturally. You'll notice that this first tone looks a little darker. It might not have been intentional, but I liked the richer tone so decided to stick with it. Once that's in place, I mix a bit more decomposed flesh into the mix to push the highlights even further, and this time I switch to a bit of dry brushing. It helps to pick out the edges and sharper folds, bringing out textures and details that the airbrush can't achieve. I keep the dry brushing pretty light, and mostly work in a downward motion, unless the folds or shape of the clothing suggest otherwise. It's one of those techniques that can make a dramatic difference very quickly. The raised edges and textures just start to pop, and you can see the shape of the figure really come into life. The trick is to keep it subtle. Let the highlights build gradually so the effect feels natural rather than harsh. Once I'm happy with that, I can start to pick out some of the smaller details, things like straps, webbing and equipment. With the main uniform colours done, I move on to hand painting all these smaller details. I start with the belts and ankle gaiters, using a mix of green, brown and decomposed flesh. It's quite close to the overalls colour, but it leans a bit more towards the green, just enough to make those areas stand out subtly. Next, I use rubber black for the boots, shoulder tabs and also the binoculars. It gives a nicer soft, worn look rather than the harsh black finish. Then I paint the binocular case and its straps with British uniform lights, which is one of those nice warm brown leather colours. Finally, I pick out the buckles and buttons with touches of silver and brass, just enough to catch the light and bring a bit of life to the figure without overdoing it. So that's where we're up to. You can really start to see the figures taking shape now. All those little variations in tone are really starting to work, and the face painting is where some personality really starts to show through. I start with the pre-shaded heads, and the first thing I do is apply the base flesh over the whole face, just avoiding the eyes. The pre-shading has already given the eyes a nice natural tone, so all I'll need to do is add a small black dot for the pupil, either now or towards the end. Next, I mix a bit of light flesh into the base flesh and start building up the tones. I cover most of the head, but leave areas under the chin, inside the ears and the two lines that run down each side of the lower nose. These spots stay darker to keep the depth and form. From there, I gradually mix in more light flesh and start working it into the forehead, the nose, upper cheeks, jawline, chin and top lip, just gently layering it up. Each time I add a little more light flesh to the mix, I reduce the area slightly so the highlights become more focused and natural. If things ever look too bright or flat, you can always go back in with a touch of the darker tone, especially around the hollows of the cheeks, to blend it all back together. It's really important to keep the paint consistency nice and thin for this process. These layers should almost act like glazes, and as they dry, they'll soften out and look less harsh than when wet. So don't panic if it looks a bit strong at first, it'll settle nicely. If you want to see a really good example on how thin paint should be, my friend Ian over at CW Modelling has just done a great video on blending layers and paint consistency. Definitely worth checking out. So I'll let the camera run for a bit while I keep working on the faces, and I'll pop some music on for a bit. Just sit back and watch it come together. Now that the faces are done, I'm finishing things off with a pin wash using oils. I'm just running the wash carefully along all the seam lines and around all the smaller details to help them stand out. I clean up as I go with a bit of spirit, just to keep things neat and make sure the wash doesn't stain any of the surrounding areas. The seam lines and details on this figure are excellent, really sharp and well defined. And when they're this good, it's honestly a joy to paint. Seeing everything come to life at this stage, when the shadows settle in and all those little shapes start to pop, it's really satisfying. To finish things off, I'm just going to glue one of the heads in place so you can see how it all comes together. And then here they are, the two crew figures side by side. I'm really happy with how these turned out. The tones feel right, the faces have a bit of life to them, and they should look great once they're in position on the Firefly. That's it for this one, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed seeing a bit more of my figure painting process. It's something I don't usually show in detail, so it's been nice to share this with you. So I'll see you all in the next one.